The spotlight was warm, almost comforting. It washed over Dean Martin like an old friend, familiar, steady, loyal. The orchestra behind him played the opening notes of Everybody Loves Somebody. The audience at the packed theater was already smiling, already leaning forward. They had come to laugh. They had come to forget their worries for a while. And Dean, as always, was ready to give them exactly that. He adjusted his tie, flashed that effortless grin, and stepped toward the microphone. But something was off. Dean had felt it since the moment he walked backstage. A strange tightness in his chest. A whisper of unease that didn't belong in a room filled with applause and bright lights. He brushed it away. Performers lived with nerves. This was nothing new. Or so he told himself. Out in the crowd, familiar faces glittered. Producers, old friends, Hollywood royalty. Somewhere in the back of his mind, one name echoed quietly. Marilyn Monroe. The woman who could light up a room without even trying. The woman whose laugh sounded like freedom. The woman who always called him Dino instead of Dean. He hadn't heard from her in days. Dean cleared his throat and began to sing. His voice, smooth and golden, floated through the hall. The audience melted into it. People swayed. Couples held hands. For a moment, everything felt like it always had. Until a man in a dark suit appeared at the edge of the stage. The man wasn't clapping. He wasn't smiling. He was waiting. Dean noticed him between verses. His eyes flicked over. The man gave a subtle nod, not applause. Not approval. A signal. Dean's stomach dropped. Still, he kept singing, a professional to the core. He finished the song. The audience erupted. Applause thundered through the hall. As Dean bowed, the man stepped closer and leaned in. "Mr. Martin," he whispered. "I'm sorry. It's Marilyn Monroe." Dean smiled automatically. "Yeah, what about her?" The man hesitated. She passed away this afternoon." The world didn't shatter. It stopped. Dean stood frozen under the lights. The applause still roared around him, but it sounded far away, like it was coming from underwater. His ears rang. His chest felt hollow. "No," Dean said quietly. "That's not funny." The man shook his head. "I wouldn't joke about this." Dean's mouth opened, but no words came out. Marilyn, gone. The girl who used to sit on his couch in the middle of the night, barefoot, crying about not being enough. The woman who hid loneliness behind glamour. The friend who once told him, "Dino, promise me you'll never forget the real me." Dean forgot he was on stage. He forgot about the audience. He forgot about everything. He took a step back from the microphone, then another. The orchestra stopped playing. The audience noticed. A hush crept across the theater. Dean stood there, eyes glassy, heart pounding. The spotlight suddenly felt too bright, too exposed. Like the world could see right through him. He leaned into the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice unsteady. I just got some news." The room went silent. A dear friend of mine, Marilyn Monroe, has passed away. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Dean swallowed hard. "I was supposed to make you laugh tonight, but right now, Atana, I don't think I can." His voice cracked. "For years, you saw her as a star, a dream, a symbol, but I knew her as a human being. Someone who tried, every single day, to be okay." He stepped back from the mic. "I'm sorry." And then, for the first time in his career, Dean Martin walked off the stage in the middle of his own show. That night changed him. Back in his dressing room, Dean sat alone in the dark. The mirror lights stayed off. He didn't want to see his face. He poured a drink and didn't touch it. His hands trembled too much. Memories flooded him. Marilyn sitting cross-legged on the floor, eating cold pizza. Marilyn calling him at 2 a.m. just to hear his voice. Marilyn saying if they really knew me, they wouldn't clap. Dean finally understood what she meant. Fame had wrapped her in gold and starved her of love. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I should have done more," he whispered to the empty room. For the first time in decades, Dean Martin, the man who made the world laugh, didn't feel funny at all. He felt broken. And this was only the beginning. The house was too quiet. Dean Martin stood in the doorway, keys still in his hand, staring into the darkness like it might answer him. Normally, he loved silence after a show. It meant the world had finally stopped asking something from him. But tonight, the silence felt heavy, accusing. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it. Marilyn was gone. The words still didn't fit together in his mind. They felt like a bad line from a script, something that would be rewritten in the morning. But this wasn't a movie. There was no second take. Dean walked into the living room and dropped his jacket on the chair where Marilyn once sat. Her shoes kicked off, laughing at nothing. He could almost hear her voice in the space she had left behind. "Dino, you ever get tired of being strong?" He poured himself a drink. The glass shook in his hand. He set it down, untouched. The memories wouldn't stop. Marilyn calling him late at night, her voice soft and tired. Marilyn joking too loudly when she was scared. Marilyn pretending she was fine when she clearly wasn't. Dean lowered himself onto the couch. He had known something was wrong. That was the part that hurt the most. He remembered the last time he saw her. She had smiled, but her eyes didn't. She'd hugged him longer than usual. "Promise me you'll keep making people laugh," she said. He had laughed it off. Now, the guilt wrapped around him like a cold coat. "I should have listened," he muttered. Outside, the city lights glowed through the windows. Hollywood was still awake, still hungry, still pretending everything was beautiful. Dean felt older than he ever had before. He stood up and went to his piano. His fingers hovered over the keys. Music had always been his escape. Tonight, it felt like a confession. He pressed one key, then another. A slow, broken melody filled the room. He began to sing softly, not for an audience, not for applause, but for a friend who would never hear it. "I'm sorry, Marilyn," he whispered between notes. "I didn't know how much you were hurting." The song faded into silence. Dean closed the piano lid and sat there, staring at his reflection in the black surface. He didn't see the star. He didn't see the legend. He saw a man who had missed the signs. That night, he didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her smile bright on the outside, lonely underneath. He realized something that shook him to his core. Sometimes, the people who make the world feel happy are the ones who need kindness the most. And he had failed to give enough. As the sun rose over Los Angeles, Dean Martin made a quiet promise to himself. He would never ignore pain again, not in himself and not in others. Because laughter meant nothing if you didn't protect the people behind it. Dean Martin stopped performing for a while, not officially, not with a big announcement. He just disappeared. Shows were postponed. Calls went unanswered. Invitations stacked up on his desk like unopened letters from another life. The world expected him to bounce back. He didn't. Every time he stepped near a stage, he saw Marilyn's face in the spotlight. Every laugh from the crowd reminded him of the silence she must have felt when she was alone. So he stayed home. Days passed, then weeks. One afternoon, his manager finally showed up unannounced. He found Dean in the backyard, sitting in the shade, staring at nothing. "You can't hide forever," the man said gently. Dean didn't look at him. "I'm not hiding. I'm thinking." "About what?" "About how easy it is to miss someone's pain." The manager sighed. "You didn't cause what happened." Dean shook his head. "No, but I ignored it." That night, Dean went for a drive. No destination. Just the road and the radio. He ended up near a small neighborhood, far from the studios. No billboards, no flashing lights. Just real people living real lives. He stopped at a small diner. Inside, a young waitress stood behind the counter. She looked exhausted. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Dean recognized that look immediately. He sat down. She poured his coffee and said, "Long day." "Long year," Dean replied. She laughed weakly. "You and me both." They talked. About nothing at first. Weather, music, life. Then she hesitated. "My brother used to love your songs," she said. "Used to. He passed last year." Nobody noticed he was struggling. The words hit Dean like a punch. He saw Marilyn again, clear as day. Dean paid the bill and left a generous tip. But more than that, he left something else behind: attention. On the drive home, something inside him shifted. He couldn't save Marilyn, but maybe he could stop ignoring others. The next week, Dean started showing up again, but differently. He visited hospitals quietly. He sat with veterans. He listened to people nobody else listened to. No cameras, no headlines, just presence. At one hospital, he met a young man who had tried to take his own life. The boy stared at the wall, empty. Dean sat beside him. "You know," Dean said softly, "I once knew someone who made the whole world smile." And nobody noticed she was breaking. The boy finally looked at him. "She deserved better," Dean continued. "So do you." Something cracked in the boy's eyes. Tears came. Dean stayed there for hours. He left that room knowing something important. Grief doesn't disappear, but it can become a reason to care more. Slowly, Dean returned to music, not for fame, but for meaning. His songs grew quieter, deeper, more honest. People noticed the change. They said he sounded different. He was. Because he had learned something Marilyn never got the chance to learn. That pain shared is lighter, and silence is dangerous. Years had passed. The world still remembered Dean Martin as the man with the smooth voice and the easy smile. But inside, he carried a quieter version of himself now, one shaped by loss, reflection, and responsibility. He had returned to the stage, not because the pain had vanished, but because he had learned how to walk with it. On one particular night, Dean stood backstage at a sold-out theater. The crowd buzzed with excitement. The orchestra warmed up. Everything looked the same as it always had. But Dean was different. He checked his reflection in the mirror. Not the handsome star everyone loved, but the human being behind it. The man who had once walked off a stage in shock. Tonight, he had made a decision. He stepped into the light. The applause was immediate and thunderous. Dean smiled, waved, and waited for it to settle. The orchestra paused, ready for his first song. Instead of singing, Dean leaned toward the microphone. "Before we start," he said, "I want to talk to you for a moment." The room went still. "I've spent most of my life making people laugh, and I'm grateful for that. But tonight, I want to tell you something honest." He took a breath. "A long time ago, I lost a friend. Someone the whole world loved. Someone who made millions of people feel happy, while she was quietly falling apart inside." The audience listened without moving. Her name was Marilyn Monroe. A ripple went through the room. Dean continued, voice steady but soft. "I found out she was gone while I was standing on a stage just like this one. And I walked away, because I didn't know how to pretend anymore." He paused. "For years, I blamed myself. Not because I caused her pain, but because I didn't see it clearly enough. I didn't ask the right questions. I didn't listen closely enough." He looked out at the crowd. "And I don't want to make that mistake again." The room was silent. Dean straightened. "So if you take anything from tonight, take this. Check on the people who make you laugh. Pay attention to the ones who say they're fine too quickly. And never assume someone is strong just because they're smiling." He stepped back from the mic. "Marilyn taught me that. Even after she was gone. For a moment, nobody clapped. Then slowly, the applause rose. Not wild, not loud, but deep, respectful. Real. Dean nodded once. The orchestra began to play. He sang, not like a star, like a man who understood loss and chose compassion. As the music filled the hall, Dean felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Not because he had forgotten Marilyn, but because he had finally honored her the right way, by turning pain into purpose, by turning silence into care, and by making sure no smile would ever be ignored again.